trying to accommodate all the last second callers. I'm Gary Oetgen, and welcome to our agency's regularly scheduled HR series. We have a record number of attendees today, in addition to our agency's team being Karen, Amy, David, and Phil. So thanks to all of you for your time and participation. The Affordable Care Act, in other words ACA, is moving ahead at full speed, as you know, and with it comes what is perhaps the most massive and complex HR compliance challenge in U.S. history for employers. As a result, employers are faced with new obligations, challenges, and uncertainty involving ACA and general compliance issues. Our goal today is to target certain hotspots and provide resources to manage them efficiently and cost-effectively. The two topics will be what you need to know about new Forms 1094 and 1095 employer reporting requirements, and number two, introduce our agency's HR compliance checklist. Within this checklist, specific compliance items will be our focus. Our moderator is Ken Spencer with HR Service, which is our HR partner. Ken's credentials are Certified Senior Professional in Human Resources, SPHR, and he's earned a master's degree in Human Resource Management, MHRM. Ken's 30-plus years of professional compliance and human resource management expertise, in addition to his team's qualified support, have assisted many of our accounts over the years. At this time, may I invite Ken to begin his Forms 1094 and 1095 tutorial. Ken?
Hey, thanks, Gary. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Everyone's favorite topic, anytime we're dealing with compliance and Affordable Care Act things, it's a challenge wading through this stuff. I hope that we can shed some light and make things a little more simple for you. Feel free throughout if you have questions. So each of you have been muted, but you have the ability to send over questions. So feel free to do that, and we'll stop periodically and address any questions as they come up. First, let me, you've got your Department of Parks and Recreation, you've got Department of Motor Vehicles. We now have the Department of stressing about the ACA reporting requirements. So this is a little bit of a challenge, and a lot of us are stressed about this, and again, we're going to hopefully shed some light to make this less stressful for you today. Let's start off with talking about who has to report. So anyone who has 50 or more employees and you're on a fully insured health plan, then you're the ones that have to report, and you have to participate as a you have to play, so to speak, where you're offering coverage, reasonable coverage for folks. And we'll go into more details on that calculation in just a moment as well. Also, anyone who's offering self-funded plans, so even smaller groups if you're offering a self-funded plan. And this includes government and nonprofit organizations as well. Right, so why do we have to go through all this reporting to the IRS? Well, the bottom line is this is how they're checking to see who's maintaining coverage. The minimum essential coverage. Also, this is how they're identifying the tax credits for those who are eligible. And then the applicable large employers, ALE, that's those that 50 or more. They're making sure that you're providing their opportunity to participate. And that's how they'll assign fines, both to individuals and to larger employers that should be offering coverage. So let's go through a little bit of a calculation on how do I decide if this applies to me. So am I an applicable large employer or not? So if I look back over the past year and I average my employee count and look at that, determine employees over the past year who averaged 30 hours or more. So if I look at those are my full-time employees, and I can calculate my full-time employees. And I can also look at my variable employees and look at the hours of service for those, divide those by 120. The hours of service includes time paid, vacation, and holidays as well. So I have to make sure I take that into consideration if I'm just a borderline, am I a participant or not. And I factor in my seasonal workers as well. Here's an example of the calculation. So if I look, I've got the whole year across here, and let's say that I do my calculations each month, and I calculate my full-time employees, those who average 30 hours or more. So I've got those along the top here. Now I come in, I look at my variable hour employees, or my part-time and seasonal folks, and I can calculate the actual hours for those individuals. And I'm showing this very simplified approach here. So each month, I look at those hours, I take the total of those hours, and I divide that by 120 hours. That's 30 hours average per week times 4. So if I divide that, that gives me the full-time equivalent for each of the months. So now if I add up the full-time to the full-time equivalent, then you can see down below here that in each of these boxes. Now I take these, I total up all of these, I get 605.45. I divide that figure by 12, and there's my average. Am I an applicable large employer? Yes, if it's 50 or more. So that's just an example for you to walk through to just make sure if there's any of you who are close to coming into that determination. Keep in mind, we'll talk about this in a little more detail, you may be part of a controlled group. So if you're part of a controlled group, and there's several factors that come into play there, then you may have to count those controlled groups as well. And I'm going to go into more detail on those in just a moment. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but that may drive and add to this as well. All right, now before I dive into the reporting requirements and actually how to complete the form and such, I do want to just briefly touch on something else that's important that you understand and you have this pinned down. And that's this measurement period, stability period, administrative periods, and what are these things and how does this apply to me? So it's important that each of you define the measurement period. The measurement period helps you to determine who's eligible. So if I know I'm an applicable large employer, and I'd recommend companies do this even if they're not an applicable large employer, because it's good to have defined, how do I decide who's covered on a plan and when does somebody on the plan or when do they come off of a plan? So the measurement period, it could be anywhere from 3 months on up to a full year. And that measurement period is that time period. Now this only comes into play for variable hour individuals. So for those who I'm looking at and I'm trying to decide, so now I'm talking new hires for a moment. So when a new hire comes onto the organization, if I know they're full-time, I'm automatically going to include them as eligible, and then they'll follow my normal eligibility requirements. But if I don't know that they're full-time, maybe I'm hiring them, I'm planning on a temporary, or I'm planning for them to be part-time, and so now they'll go under this measurement period. And let's just say, for example, I'm using 12 months as my measurement period. So if I use that 12 months, now that individual, I'll look at and track their work time over the next 12 months. Now you want to, for every individual, because everybody doesn't hire right at the first of the month, all new hires, you're going to want to say, define as your measurement period that it starts, based on the first of the month following their date of hire. So that way I'm only having to look at this 12 times throughout the year to decide who's eligible or who's not for the variable hour folks, for new hires. And so that's the measurement period. Now the stability period, that's the amount of time that once they verify that they're eligible to participate, that's the time period they could stay on. It has to be a minimum of 6 months, and it would be for the same amount of time that your measurement period was. So in our example, if I use 12 as my measurement period, then they would have a stability period for 12 months as well. Now I can have an administrative period, and that's the time period that I can use to calculate, to determine who's eligible, to get them the forms and get them set up on the service. And that could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You cannot, for the new hires, I can't have more than a total of 13 months before someone would start. So if I have a measurement period of 12, my administrative period can't be more than 30 days. Anyway, that's just a little brief introduction of that, because it's an important process that we get down in terms of the eligibility and how we're offering coverage. All right, let's dive into back into the ACA reporting. So ACA, what is this? It's the filing required information to the IRS, sending copies to employees is basically what you're going to be doing with this. It's important that we start gathering data now, if you haven't already, because we're reporting on, if we've determined we're an applicable large employer for 2015, we're going to be reporting on 2015 that's due by the 31st of January 2016. So I've got to get something in place now where I'm tracking the data. And we're going to go through what kind of data do you track, how do you fill out the form, what should you be doing now to be ready for this. So if we look at the two new codes, so we've got now IRS code 6055 and IRS code 6056. 6055 deals with the minimum essential coverage, and there's certain information that we track associated with that, and we're going to go into more detail on this. 6056 deals with the employer responsibilities, and we'll go into detail on that as well. Now, if we look at the reporting data requirements, the kind of information you're tracking and gathering here, and then again, we're going to go into the actual form and show you where this is all at. But it's a lot of it's basic stuff: employer name, address, EIN, calendar year, contact person, telephone number, and then it gets a little more complicated. Show that I've offered the full-time and dependents opportunity to enroll in minimum essential coverage. The month's coverage was available. The premium share, each full-time employee's share of the lowest cost of the monthly premium for self-only. Number of full-time employees during each month. So you can see this gets a little complicated. How am I going to track all of this information? Name, address, taxpayer ID. Additional information obtained through the use of the indicator codes in the document. We're going to go through some of those indicator codes in actually filling out the document so you'll know what those are and know how you have to gather that kind of information. So the different forms that are going to be used to report this, there's individual forms, which is 1094A, and that'll deal with the marketplace. There's 1095B, which deals with insurers and those employers who are sponsoring self-funded plans. And then there's 1095C, and this for those for applicable large employers and self-funded plans. This is where we're going to focus today, is on 1095C. Now the transitional forms, there's like a cover sheet form, which is 1094C, is what we'll also briefly touch on that. So our main emphasis today is if you're an applicable large employer and you're filling in those forms. Okay, so let's dive into the form. So this is the actual form, and I'd recommend for those, for those of you who are administering this to find this form. You can find it online. You just type in the 1095C employer 2015 form on the internet, and it'll pop up with instructions and such. Let's go through this. Most of this is pretty straightforward. When we look at Part 1, I've got name of employee, Social Security number. Now this is the form, by the way, that I'm going to be filling out and providing to each of my employees. So very similar to a W-2 form where I give them a copy and then I give a copy to the IRS. You're going to be going through a very similar process here. So this form here that's going to go to employees, I'll fill in this basic information about the employee, and then I only fill out if I'm using a fully insured plan. I'm only going to complete Part 1 and Part 2. I do not complete Part 3 if I'm providing a fully insured plan. I only do Part 3 if that's a self-funded plan. So if I'm doing a self-funded plan, then I'll do Part 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll also use a transmittal form of 1094B that would go in with that. Okay, so the first part here is pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little complicated here is in dealing with Part 2, Sections 14, 15, and 16. So I'm going to go into more detail on each of these sections. And you'll see in here I've put in Category 1A, and I've listed that in here for all 12 months. And I'm going to show you, let's go to that chart here, and then I'll come back and forth to this. So if I go into Part 2, I'm in Question 14. This is the code that describes the type of coverage that's offered. So if I've offered what's called a qualifying offer, that would be 1A, and that's what I had there was 1A. So if I have a qualifying offer, that means I'm providing minimum essential coverage, and the cost of that for self-only coverage is less than 9.5%, and at least a minimum essential coverage offered to the spouse and dependents. So if I'm covering all of those things, then I'm going to I'll be able to put 1A. And I can do it, as you can see here, I put it in all months. So if it's all 12 months, I put that in and I'm done. Now, if that type of coverage offered changed somewhere throughout the month, then I would use a different code. So now you can see the other codes down here. I'll read just a couple of others. Minimum essential coverage, providing minimum value offered to employee only. So if I'm only offering it to the employee only and not spouse and dependents, then I would use 1B, and so on. So you can see you've got different options here, and this is a good section. I would say of the instructions that you're going to want to read, I would read the instructions for section Part 2, 14, 15, and 16. Okay, so now if we go, I'm going to go on to coming back here to Part 15. So now if I go to Part 15, I only complete this section if I used a code 1B, 1C, or 1D. So if I coded it as I had done before, that I had made a qualifying offer 1A, then I don't even have to fill out part 215. So I only fill that out if I've, and so then you can see, then I would use the whichever provide them the details about the premium. So it says that, so if I've used 1B, 1C, 1D, or 1E, then I enter the amount of the employee's share of the lowest cost monthly premium for self-only minimum essential coverage. Enter in that value. So I would enter that into each of the boxes. If it's the same amount all the way across, then I enter it all the way across. Again, that's only if I use one of these other codes. I think in a lot of instances, 1A is going to apply, and then it would be very, very simple there. If I go down to 16, so Part 2, Section 16. So for each calendar month, I enter the applicable code. Okay, so now I look down and I look at these codes, and so for each of the calendar months, I have to enter in a code here. And it may be that so if I skip down here and I say 2C, employee enrolled in coverage offered. So if they're enrolled in coverage offered and it was that way all the way across, then I would put in 2C in every month. If the employee is not employed during that month, then I would enter 2A. So you can see I could have some changes in the code that would go in across for each month depending on when someone hired or depending on if there were changes in their coverage. This does add a little bit of complication to filling these out. Okay, so if you have any questions about any of these, this is probably the biggest challenging areas is this 14, 15, and 16. Let me know, but I'm just hitting some of these, the key sections here, not reading the whole document. Okay, so now if I come down to the transmittal form, okay, so that was 1095C. 1095C is what I provide to each of the employees. So now I'm down to 1094C. This is a transmittal form. Think of it like a cover sheet that you submit in with a copy of each of those that I provided out to each of the participants. Pretty straightforward information that's here. Section 22 is a little more complicated where I indicate, so if I had a qualifying offer method where basically I had 1A and I offered it all to participants, spouse, and dependents, then I would check that box. If I had a qualifying offer method with transitional relief, that would mean that I had 95%, that I offered it to 95% of individuals with a 1A in that other, in box 14. Now there may be a 98% offer method that I used where I provide coverage for up to 98% of individuals. So again, you'll do some of those calculations to determine which box you check there. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. I come in here. Now I've mentioned here, so if I could mark yes if I offered minimum essential coverage to 95% of individuals. I could check that box there, and then other than that, I would just answer each of these questions: full-time employee count, total employee count, and then just answer these other questions across the board here. So again, as I mentioned before, think of this like a W-2. The employer reports to the IRS on coverage information. Employer reports to employee the reports are due by the 31st. You can mail these to individuals with the W-2 or hand it out, and in fact, I'd recommend that. Just make it part, send one thing, you send your W-2, you also include your 1095Cs. Now, I mentioned before about controlled groups. Probably should have had this slide right back with the others, but just so you understand controlled groups, because in determining am I applicable large employer, you need to make sure, if you've got 2 or more organizations, I may need to count the total to determine, am I applicable large employer? So there's a number of tests here. It's what's called, one is a parent subsidiary, then the parent business owns 80% of the subsidiary. If that's the case, then I would count them as well as the subsidiary in the total to determine if I'm an applicable large employer. There's also the brother-sister calculation. 5 or fewer persons who own 80%, then they would count those organizations that fall into there, and then could be some combinations thereof. Okay, so when are reports due? Reports are due by January 31st, 2016, no later than February 1st, that 1095-C that goes out to the recipients and employees. I also need to submit in, if I'm mailing a copy into the IRS, and I would need to have that complete by February 29th. Then I would submit in my 1090 copies of 1095Cs, and my 1094C submittal form would all go into the IRS by the 29th. And March 31st, if I wanted to file electronically, I have a little bit more time and I can file electronically. Now, a couple of key points. If you have 250 or more employees, then you must file electronically. And you can get an extension of 30 days if you want to file Form 8809. So that would help you to extend that longer if you wanted to. Where to file, if you're mailing it in most cases here, now there are some, you want to verify the states that you're filing for, to make sure, exactly where that's mailed to, but most of them will go to this location, or you can file electronically. Now, if you decide you just want to ignore this and not complete this reporting requirements, there's some pretty hefty penalties. $250 per day per return that it should have been done, up to $3 million max. So it's a pretty hefty penalty. It's something we can't ignore. They're a little more flexible this first year. If you're putting forth a reasonable effort to complete and get this done, they're not going to assign penalties and fines. Here's a couple of steps I'd recommend that you take into consideration. First, make sure that you know which information to track. Look at the forms 1095C, 1094C, and we briefly highlighted the things that you need to track and the information you need to gather. Develop a process and documentation that shows the full-time and eligibility status. I'd make sure I'm collecting from everyone who's eligible, and I've made offers to, I either get an application or I get a waiver form. And make sure you're gathering and keeping all that documentation. Develop a process to collect information about the offers of coverage, and that's what I just mentioned there. Review the ownership structures. Make sure if I've got any controlled groups, especially if I'm considering, if I'm not sure if I'm an applicable large employer. Discuss these requirements with your payroll provider or any other third-party administrators. Find out what they're already doing. What are they offering? They may have some tools and resources there to help you. And then just ensure you have systems in place to collect the needed data. Gary, I'm going to turn back over to you for just a moment on any discussion about any recommendations along these lines.
Thank you, Ken. Excellent overview. At this juncture, hopefully you're better oriented with these forms. Many payroll providers, as Ken alluded to, are providing assistance with this new responsibility, which is great. Additionally, our agency has recently identified a payroll independent provider that offers qualified full-service support if needed. Their certified ACA analysts will determine the information requirement and sources of data while filtering and cleaning all the gathered data. They'll prepare and e-file your 1094 and 1095 forms for IRS filing. Also, with this independent provider, all technology and materials, of course, will be maintained for ACA accuracy. Essentially, much of this worry can be taken off your hands. Another plus is their employer direct agreements fees are substantially reduced thanks to our national partnerships leverage through United Benefit Advisors. If interested in this service, please contact me for further information. Now moving to the second half of our webinar, our compliance checklist. Ken?
Great, thanks, Gary. So there was a question that came up. I just wanted to answer that question, and then we'll dive into here. Someone asked the question, can we have copies of these sheets or these slides? And yes, we will make these available in two ways. So I'll provide an actual PDF copy of all of the slides back to Gary and his team, and they'll forward or make those available. We're also recording this event, so if there's others in your office who you would like to see this, you'll be given a link where you could watch this again or provide it to someone else. Okay, let's dive into the employee benefit compliance summary. So what we have here is a big comprehensive list that shows all of the various compliance requirements. And you could look at this as kind of a checklist. If you look across here, you'll see, what's the impact to you? What are the potential penalties, the maximum penalties? Is there a cost to a service? How difficult is it to implement? Some of these things are provided for by your carriers. This top section here is highlighted, and those are all provided by the carrier. This next section that's in white are things that you're pretty much responsible to set up and manage on your own. You get some guidance and help from Gary and his team, such as they're giving now on this applicable ACA reporting requirements. I mean, ultimately, all of these responsibilities do fall back to the employer. You're the one that has to make sure that all of these things are happening, but you have resources to help you. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll go through some of the details now about some of these things and then the resources to assist you through that process. So if you go through and you look at some of these items, I'm not going to hit every single one for sake of our time today, but just in like this first section here, for example, the summary of benefits and coverage. You'll receive that from your insurance provider, but you need to make sure that you get it out to all participants. You'll see down here there's certain requirements, other things you need to make sure you're doing, such as the Form 5500 reporting. If you have 100 or more participants, pretty big penalties if you're not getting that out, if you're not taking care of that. So you need to make sure that you're looking at these things and you're doing this every year. You should register with the Center for Medicare Services, CMS, and make sure that you're indicating there whether you have offer credible coverage. And then there's a notice that goes out with that. We've got that listed down here as well. And we've talked about the employer reporting. There's some other things that you need to make sure. And I think most of employers are pretty good at taking care of COBRA now. And so you need to make sure, if anyone has continuation rights to coverage, understand those rules and that you're getting those out and making sure that that happens. Section 125 premium only plans. So if you're offering, most of us want to offer our participants in the plan the ability to pay for their share of the premiums on a pre-tax basis. So in order to do that, we have to offer either a Section 125 premium only plan document. We have to have that in place, otherwise we're in violation of the IRS laws. Or have a flexible spending account where you have actual medical and child care options, or where they pay for those also on a pre-tax, and then it's written into those documents to allow for the premium to be included as well. So you need to make sure you have one of those things. Keep in mind, most of these documents are out of date if you're older than last year, because there were changes last year. There were a couple of changes in these documents, so you want to make sure you get those amended, updated, or just replaced. Okay, so let's dive in now. I'm going to go into these other sections here, but instead of covering it here, I'm actually going to go into a different slide. There's a number of services, so you have various notices that have to go out based on the size of your group, based on certain things like, if we skip down to a couple of these, like wellness plan program notice. Well, that only applies if I offer a wellness plan. Or there's a grandfather plan notice, again, only if I have a grandfather plan. Not too many of those around anymore. More and more they're kind of phasing out. But there's a lot of these other notices that we have to get out to participants every year. And I'll show you a tool, so you'll see over here in terms of assistance and who's helping with these things. We offer a service called Compliance Basics that will assist with all of these, a number of these tools or a number of these requirements. So I'm going to go into some detail on that for you. First, let's talk about this. There's what's called a summary plan description that's required. ERISA, who governs all the benefit plans, they require that every participant receive a summary plan description, or a summary plan description wrap document. SPD is the abbreviation. So a wrap document, where the two differ, I could individually, as an employer, create a summary plan description for each of the benefit plans I offer: medical, dental, life, vision, etc. Or I could instead set up just one summary plan description wrap document that would provide me a plan document and a summary plan description for each of my benefit plans that wraps around all of the benefits I offer. So I have one program, and with this tool, what it does is it pulls in the missing insurance company stuff. So I don't individually have to pull in and create all this other missing information. Now, it's more than what you get from the insurance company. It's not just a summary plan, summary plan. Sorry, need to go backwards here. I wanted to go back to this other. So it's not just a summary of benefits and coverage. It's more than that. And it's all these other things that ERISA wants participants to receive. ERISA requires that you distribute a summary plan description or a wrap document to all participants every 5 years. And then in between time, if you have changes, that you provide them with a summary of benefits and a summary of benefits and coverage. I'm sorry, a summary benefit change. So there's also that requirement of a summary of material modification if you've had any changes in the benefits that's going on, within there. And then you have to provide a current new SPD or wrap document to all new hires. So again, this is a requirement. If you're missing that, you could receive fines. They are doing more audits now. They've hired thousands of additional auditors. We've heard rumor that they're actually planning to audit all plans by 2018. So you don't know if you're going to be audited next month or in 2 years from now. Now, also by virtue of offering medical insurance, there's a number of notices that come into play. And this is going back to that big list that we had on there before. So you've got all these different notices, everything from initial COBRA on down to this summary of benefits and coverage. And then we've, of course, briefly spoken about, we talked about the SPD wrap or summary of material modifications. And so we've got all these issues. There's one in here that's called the health exchange notice. Now that was due back in November of 2013. If you didn't get it out then, then it should have gone out to everyone. And then we don't have to give it out again every year, but we have to give it to all new hires. And so these are all important notices that you get taken care of. Now, we offer this a service called Compliance Basics Plus, that if you use that service, we have a tool inside of there where you go in and you answer a few simple questions and you push a button and then to generate your notices, and it creates this all-in-one notice. It pulls in which notice applies, populates it, fills it out, and then emails it to you in a ready-to-deliver format. And then if you have any questions on generating that, or if you are using the tool, we also provide a summary plan description wrap document service. And if you have any questions with that, Gary's team can help, we can help, and it's all very easy to use and operate inside of there. The documents, whether it's the employee notices or the SPD wrap documents, there's different ways you can distribute these. You could either mail them out in a paper form, you could hand it to someone, or you can post it on an intranet or send it via email. Now, there's certain things that you ought to do depending on your approach. Most are finding ways to do it electronically. Not only does it save trees, it's a lot less hassle. You just need to make sure that you document how you've sent that out. And if you're sending it via an intranet, you still have to separately notify folks, whether you're doing that via an email or mailing them something that explains how to go in and access that. If you're sending it via email, it has to be to an employee's regular work email, or you need to make sure you obtain a written consent on authorizing you to send it to a personal email. And we have all those forms and documents necessary to help you, with that process if you're using our service. Okay, so fines and penalties for not getting out your notices and your SPDs can be pretty hefty as well. $110 up to $110 a day per participant, or $500,000. So again, it's pretty important that we keep up on all of these things. Let me show you. I'm going to go out of here for a moment, and I'll just briefly show you this tool if it looks like something that might be of interest to you. And then we have a special partner key for anyone who's interested, 1152 for the Gary Oetgen Agency to assist with this. So let me go out of here for a moment, and I'm going to go over to the internet. Let me just show you what this looks like. So if I go into at hrserviceinc.com, and if I were signed up on the Compliance Basics Plus service, so if I went to Compliance Basics, so if I log into the system, what this would give me is each month I would receive a legal update and due date reminder, state and federal all employment laws. I would also receive one best practice article that gives you, that covers some important detail of compliance. So like last month we covered the Affordable Care Act, various calculations. Another month we covered the ACA reporting. We sent an article out on this in January. So if I were on this service, first I would receive proactively emailed to me those two items. And then I would also receive access to these web-based tools. So if I'm on this service, I would receive a username and password that would allow me to log into the system. Now once I log into the system, then I could go in, I have all these tools to help me with my compliance. So we talked about this all-in-one notice. So if I go into employee notices, employee notice report, I could very simply answer these questions about my company and about my benefits. And this is where I would go in and generate this all-in-one notice. It would take care of all my annual notice requirements, or I could take care of my health exchange notice requirement here as well. I could also access other forms and documents. I could access any of our past legal updates, either month by month, or I could have a legal library where I could search by topic for any topic that's gone on over the past several years. I receive access to a section for forms and documents. Most of you have these kinds of things in place already, but it's nice to have a one-place stop where you can get the latest I-9, W-4, job application, direct deposit form. We're going to be adding in other useful tools and forms inside of here soon. There's a section where you can access all of our best practice articles. So we have articles on every kind of topic that you can imagine that you may need guidance and assistance on. Once a year, we provide you with a calendar, a compliance calendar. With this compliance calendar, you can see the whole year at a glance, and so it'll show the date, the compliance issue, and your actions. And then in the monthly legal alerts, you'll receive a reminder of any of these key things. So like in February, there's an OSHA posting requirement. We would notify you of that OSHA posting requirement in January and remind you of the steps and actions. So it's just a nice way to help you keep current and keep up on everything that's going on. There's other articles in here. I mentioned that we wrote an article on the employer reporting requirements. And by the way, I'll make this available as well to everyone who's participating today. So this will be sent around to you as well. Also inside of this center is where I would complete and generate my summary plan description wrap document. So this becomes a center where you can save and store your data, where you answer the various questions here that helps you to generate this required summary plan description, and I could generate the document. I could have it sent to me or send it, actually a copy, if I wanted a copy to go over to my broker, I could do that as well. There's a tool in here for HIPAA compliance. I can come in here to HIPAA. I could determine where it says start here, determine if I'm an applicable, if I'm a covered entity, and the steps to take to create a program. And I can come back in here and actually then access all the forms and documents needed to set up a HIPAA compliance program. If I have a 125 POP service through us, you can access that from here as well. I can generate my summary of material modifications from here. So there's just a lot of things that you can do from this area. Now, if this looks like something that's of interest to you, I'm going to briefly walk through what you would do to get set up on this now, but then I'll also, Gary and his team will send around some information for you as well to help you, because again, their goal, our goal is to help you be compliant and to make this simple. And so hopefully what we've talked about here today would help to simplify the process in helping you to generate those required forms, save the information, easily manage these required documents. Now, if I wanted to get started with this service, what I would do is I'd go to hrserviceinc.com. I would click Get Started Now. Inside the Get Started Now, then I would choose what level of service I wanted. And you can click these links for more details about each of the services. The most popular is this Compliance Basics Plus SPD Wrap and POP document. So for $279 a year, you get everything that's inside of here. And most of our clients continue this year by year. We try and keep the cost minimal so that it's not that expensive, that they can help them with the tools and resources. Now, because you work with Gary and his team, you do receive 5% off of that as well. Now, if I were signing up for that particular service, so any of these, you can pick any of these options, I click this Compliance Basics Plus, and I would say Next. I would enter in my username and password that I wanted to log into the system with, and then I would put in my partner key. So the partner key is 1195. So if I'm putting in the partner key 1195, I'm going to verify that. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 1152. I'm telling you wrong. It's 1152. So if I put in 1152, then that's the partner key for Gary and his team. That will also give them access so they can go in and see your documents and possibly help answer any questions that you might have. So they can assist with that, and then this will give you 5% off. Now from here, there is no promotional code, so if I put in that partner key, the username and password, I hit Next, then it's going to ask me for some basic information about your company name, address, phone number, email, and then you would just pay with a credit card. So that's a very simple approach that we could take to help you get set up on this if this looks like something that would benefit you. Okay, now I'd like to open this up if anyone has any questions about anything we've talked about today. We've gone through the Affordable Care Act employer reporting requirements. We've gone through a number of the requirements for benefit compliance, and then we've talked about some tools to help you with that, going through that process. So I just want to come back to that and see if there are any questions at all at this time. And by the way, if as I mentioned, we'll send out copies of this, as well as the slides, as well as the steps to take to get set up on the service that we talked about that could help you to make this compliance stuff go easier. You can email me directly at ken@hrserviceinc.com or call me anytime at 801-685-8400 extension 6. And it looks like I don't see any other questions coming over right now. So Gary, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you, Ken. Very informative and timely as always. We appreciate your support. Also, we thank all of our attendees today concerning these important topics. Once again, a link to today's webinar recording will be sent to you in a few days for your future reference. Also, to loop back to the beginning of this webinar, please don't worry too much about these 1094 and 1095 filings. We are happy to introduce a full service support that will simply take it off your hands, and our agency will have some involvement with that as far as data transmission to assist you. At this point, this concludes our program. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or concerns, and everyone have a good afternoon.